Good evening, everyone. Good afternoon. It is remarkable and amazing, as always, to be home. And if you're going to come home for a few hours, this would be a great place to spend it. Obviously, when I lived in Toronto, this didn't exist, and it is really one of the greatest places to come. I just got here a couple hours ago. I landed from New York, and I'm out tomorrow morning. But I wanted to make it here not just because this is a great event, but because you're about to hear from a great friend of mine, a friend and mentor. I want to bring him out here to have the conversation. Michael Fertik is the founder of Reputation.com. He is now the CEO of Heroic Ventures. Truly, if this is a candy store of ideas tonight, this is like the ice cream truck of ideas. Whenever I see Michael, I just get energized. He really has been a friend to me over the years, an advisor, a mentor, and he's a frequent guest on my show. And every time he's on, people want more of it, which really heartens, warms my soul. That when Michael talks about things, my job is to talk less because it's a lot of wisdom. Michael is based in Silicon Valley. He has started companies. He now finances the starting of other companies. He's dogged and determined in how he does it, but he also is steeped in the society and culture and community that is Silicon Valley, which, that may be amazing to some people, and some people might say, what's that about? So we want to talk about that. But the first thing we want to talk about, because some of you are entrepreneurs, and some of you want to be entrepreneurs, is this concept of risk that we have, and the idea that Silicon Valley, or places like Silicon Valley, and there aren't many, are different from the rest of the investing world and the business world in that they are much bigger risk takers. They are much more aggressive with their risk. They're much more willing to lose money. They're much more willing to bet on things that are less certain than typical investors would invest in. And A, I want to know if that's true, and B, if it's not true, what does represent how people like you and Silicon Valley writ large think about how to build a world and how to build a business.
Thank you very much. And thank you also to Ali and to Salim and to the entire TTG team. Ali and I do a lot of events separately together, but I can tell you this is a very well-run event, and I hope you appreciate that because many events are as august but not as well-run. And thank you to everyone who's helping operate the event. Also, by the way, I was very lucky to take a tour of the Ismaili Center, which is magical, and especially that incredible prayer hall, which brings together these beautiful ancient themes with the contemporary steel and glass infrastructure. Amazing place. I have learned 10 things today about Ismaili Islam and about Islamic culture, so thank you very much for that. Yes, thank you very much for that. By the way, I am now moved to add, I am super Jewish, and so it's nice in these moments for some of this to be happening, if you know what I mean. So, so really good. That's good vibes. Thank you. Also, by the way, Ali's beautiful and intelligent, brilliant wife, Lori, is here somewhere. And she's
right
over
there.
there. Hello, Lori. Hey, Lori. Okay, great. Okay, so demythologizing risk. Thank you, Ali. Yes, a lot of people who think about Silicon Valley and think about starting companies think somehow that maybe the people who live in Silicon Valley and start companies are somehow from a different species, that we somehow think about risk differently and that we somehow operate differently and that we maybe are swashbuckling piratical types and so forth. And there's good features of that, there's less good features of that. So look, like anything else, it's partly true and probably partly not true, right? So I do think that in Silicon Valley, where there is an immense amount of creativity, there's an immense amount of receptivity, right, to new ideas and novelty, there are people who are more risk on, less risk averse as compared to other populations. And I can give some data if you want. But like anything else, there becomes over time a kind of a myth, a kind of a fetish of this very special place where on the one hand, anything is possible, and I'm proud of that. And on the other hand, where only these things can only happen only if you're in Silicon Valley. Now, if we had to compare, let's face it, let's just acknowledge a couple of things. If we had to compare a room full of tax accountants to a room full of Silicon Valley entrepreneurs. It wouldn't take a genius to know which has more risk appetite than the other. Okay, we can acknowledge that. But one of the things that I think we can do to demythologize risk and demythologize this notion of Silicon Valley's uniqueness, which we can also celebrate, but to demythologize it, one thing we can do is to understand the posture of Silicon Valley entrepreneurs to risk versus the posture of other populations perhaps to risk. And when I offer this to you, I think you might understand how this is something that kind of anyone can do in some measure in their lives. The natural default position of a lot of people in the world to risk is a position of inaction, right? I'm going to take no action. I can identify risk, and of course we can always identify risk, and therefore I will do nothing. My default setting will be to do as little as possible so as to avoid the risk. And by the way, sometimes that's a good idea. As is always the case, sometimes anything is a good idea, usually almost everything. But Silicon Valley entrepreneurs usually handle risk through action rather than inaction, and that's a pretty good rule of thumb for us to think about. So if we take a funny example of what that looks like, probably all of you have had in your lives a friend, and I do mean a friend, or perhaps a sibling, or perhaps a son or a daughter, who has had a girlfriend or boyfriend you did not like and was not really up to snuff. You know what I'm talking about? Can you think of this person, please, just in your head? We can all envisage him or her, right? It's like, ay, 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 would you just break up with him already? You know what I mean? And you know, by the way, it may have been you, but let's pretend it's the other guy, right? And heaven forbid you be the boyfriend or girlfriend they actually want you to break up with, but okay, fine. So let's imagine for a second that you know who we're talking about, right? And in this way, you also have observed that your friend is sort of stuck on him, is sort of stuck on her, and is sort of afraid of the dating scene, is sort of afraid of re-entering the market, right? You talk like this in Canada too, right? Okay. And so, and of course, that's sort of a natural act. Wow, dating is frightening, and the unknown is sort of frightening, and so forth and so on. And so the default setting often with your friend, and sometimes you just want to say to your friend, not to yourself in the mirror ever, but to your friend, oh, please just take that small action of dumping him or her, because so much will go right for you if you do that. You know what I mean? Right? Do you know what I'm talking about? Yes? Can I get a yes? Or am I, okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Just to make sure I'm speaking the same language. Okay, so that is managing risk through inaction. I will do nothing. I will totally stay with this mediocre boyfriend or girlfriend, and then things happen, you get married, and maybe it works out, maybe you don't. That's managing risk through inaction. Managing risk through action is, well, I'm sorry, dear John, dear Jane, it's been so wonderful, but I can't wait to be finished with this terrible relationship. And managing risk through action would be just maybe thinking about and researching other possible boyfriends or girlfriends. Maybe not dating, not two-timing, that's not what I'm talking about. But there's action, which is taking the break and going towards the risk of a new day. The risk that you manage through inaction is the risk of the unknown. The risk that you manage through action is also, by the way, the risk of the unknown. They're the same thing. They're two sides of the same coin, and they are the same thing. So, but the posture is very different. In Silicon Valley, the world beater entrepreneurs and the venture capitalists do think about nothing ventured, nothing gained. They try. They break up with their boyfriends and girlfriends all the time. Sometimes not as much as I'd like them to do, but yes, in their business lives, they break up with their boyfriends and girlfriends all the time. So, what do? What's a real example of something that they do? In Silicon Valley, it is very easy to get a meeting with almost anybody, right? Silicon Valley people are very open-minded and they're very receptive. So if you email them, they might sort of say, oh, talk to my junior person first, but you can kind of get your way to him or her. I've done little studies. I've measured that 9 out of 10 times when I reach out to someone in Silicon Valley, they are receptive and so forth. And also in other places I've been. Guess where they don't do that? They don't really do it in France. They're not very receptive. They're not very receptive in England. They're not very receptive in Japan, right? It's sort of a different culture. But the receptivity is very open in Silicon Valley. But they don't come looking for you. You got to go looking for them. And so taking the risk of the action of meeting someone once a week, taking your Friday afternoons and exposing yourself to a new person, a new idea, saying yes when someone reaches out to you on a lark, these are things that make you open to the universe and allow you to be a little bit more risk-on. And what do they allow you to do? They allow you to explore your business idea, not through doubt, but through, hey, is the world responding to my business idea? Is the world responding to my initiative idea? Is the world responding to my entrepreneurial idea? Another example of managing risk through action might be, I want to start this company. I think it's going to cost $100,000. That's a lot. Well, a lot of people would just say, it's too much. I can't take that risk. My family depends on me. I've got to pay off my loans, whatever it might be. I understand that. But managing that risk through action would be, what can I do? What homework can I do that's free? Because thought is free. Thinking is free. What homework can I do to make my testable hypothesis a $10,000 test, not a $100,000 test? We all have our scale. It could be 5,000. It could be 500,000 for some people. What can I do to make that test really, really testable, really, really small? And I see that behavior in Silicon Valley entrepreneurs all the time. And there's nothing magical about Silicon Valley that gives rise to that behavior, something that all of us can do.
So you get, I do highly oversimplify what you do for a living. You get ideas. You look for ideas and you get people coming to you with ideas, and they are looking for that financing at various levels. But you get great exposure to people at their earliest levels. You obviously have certain specializations. But if I were that guy, by the way, I have been that guy. I have gone to Michael many times with ideas, things I'm thinking about on every level, and he's just great at, he welcomes that. He doesn't ever think it's a problem.
Thank you.
But what are you looking for? Because you obviously get more pitches for people to take your money to invest in their business than you do deals.
Yes.
So what makes the difference?
Okay, so what I do in investing is a very narrow thing. It's venture capital, and venture capital really only belongs to is appropriate to only a very small number of kinds of investments. So I want to demystify it, demythologize it very quickly. Most great companies in the world, in history and now, should not and do not take venture capital. Venture capital is only really belongs in companies that are highly levered, meaning they need a certain amount of capital. They're going to operate at a significant loss for a while, and then once they hit certain milestones, the revenue jet turns on. Make sense? Okay, so that belongs a lot in software, some hardware, some robotics, some life sciences. That's venture capital. So it's of the 100% of companies that get founded and started that could become great, my guess is 5%, even to begin with, really are appropriate for venture capital. And that's nothing to say about the business. It's just what venture capital needs. Venture capital needs a very large return, right? So venture capital is not a loan. If you lose the venture capitalist money, we don't do anything about it, right? We just sort of say, well, sorry, and you get to say, well, I don't have to give the money back, and the answer is, yeah, you don't have to give the money back. That's what venture capital generally is. It's not a loan. It's not a line of credit. So in order to make that economics work, venture capital needs to look for a very highly levered company. So that's number one. So it has to be a company that fits. Number two, look, a lot of great entrepreneurs come in different shapes and sizes, and let's face it. A lot of people say, well, we fetishize grit. We need something called grit. And I don't really know what grit is. I know what being a lazy person is, I think, but I don't know what grit is. I think more than that, more than anything else, the thing that I look for, the thing that makes venture capital-backed entrepreneurs really remarkable is the capacity to learn autodidactically. The people I see who are so remarkable almost always are people who are constant self-teachers and self-learners. So no one greater at this than Elon Musk. You can like him, you can leave him, you can like Tesla or not. I'm not asking you to opine on that just now. But what I can tell you is, it's very obvious if you know his public profile too, he's a learning machine. Hey, Elon, someone asked him in the press, how did you learn about rockets? Well, he said, well, I read about them.
When you,
and that's true. He read about rockets.
When you are from somewhere else in the world and someone asks you, they say, America, what do you think? Depending on where your mind is, you might think innovation and entrepreneurship and get to Silicon Valley.
Yep.
You might think, wow, crazy political system headed toward some sort of possible political disaster. You've seen both worlds. You are a thinker in both worlds. You worked when President Obama had a working group on technology in Silicon Valley. You were involved in that. What do you see right now?
Well, thank you for that. So despite my very long hair and leather pants, I'm actually a pretty traditional person. I will not criticize my president when I'm outside the United States. I think you will understand that. But I will say this, you should be rooting for us. I would ask you only to think of this. If you could conceive of the world's greatest possible ever, most empowered, most historically remarkable Canadian premier, which you may or may not have now, I don't know, and then you could consider a very mediocre American president, which one would be better for you? That's all I want to ask you, right? So setting aside the starving nations of the earth, even in Canada, I think that our premier has a higher impact on your lives than yours does. So you should be rooting for us, and I hope to invite you to be rooting for us and for us to lean to the better side of our nature as we can and we should. There's nothing wrong with America that will not be solved with those things that are right with America. You should count on us. We will figure this out. Okay, so what do I say? I think that I have never felt this level of fear in my life.
Didn't see that one coming, right?
I am not attributing it to a particular person, let the record reflect. And I do not exclude the possibility of internal armed conflict, which would be disastrous for everyone. I invite you never to disdain us, never to have contempt for us, but instead to root for us. If you are eligible for dual citizenship, I encourage you to take dual citizenship and pay American taxes and vote in American elections, especially in Broward County in Florida.
Which, by the way, is where a lot of Canadians do end up in their winters.
And I also encourage you to try to see it our way. I grew up in New York City. I grew up as a Jewish kid from the Upper West Side, which means that my grandparents were red. That means communist for those people under 30. My parents were sort of pinkos. I have the best possible left-of-center credentials you can imagine in the American pantheon. Jewish kid from the Upper West Side. And by the way, my father, who sometimes thinks that I represent the establishment, which is hilarious, says to me, Michael, you and those Harvard Business School kids, I didn't go to Harvard Business School, by the way. I didn't. I went to Harvard Law School. But he said, you and those Harvard Business School people are ruining this country. Dad, I didn't go to Harvard Business School. Doesn't want to hear it. He thinks that we all went to Harvard Business School. I would just say this to you. I would invite you to take the other side seriously. I went to law school, and I chose to clerk for a very remarkable man named Danny J. Boggs. His real name is Danny. He was the chief judge of the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals of the United States, which is Tennessee, Kentucky, Ohio, and Michigan. He was appointed by Reagan at the age of 38 to be a judge of the circuit court, which is a very big deal. It's the court from which Kavanaugh just came in the DC level. Very senior judge and chief judge. And I went there to Louisville, Kentucky, to a red state to work for a judge who was appointed by a Republican president. And I learned so much in doing it. You know as well as anybody what it is to be misunderstood. Let's face it. And I encourage you and invite you to think about our friends in the middle of the country, which looks so red on a map, which votes red only by a few percentage points often. They are Americans too, they are people too, they believe in things. And what I encourage my liberal friends to remember is they will die for you and me in a heartbeat. And they do it every day. And they believe in things very, very passionately and very seriously and very completely. And that is to be esteemed, as you know it is to be esteemed. And so I invite us not to give up on our friends, but instead to reach out, and that goes especially also, or just as much for our friends in Canada. I encourage you to not just not give up on us, but to reify and recommit to engaging with us in all of the better parts of our nature south of your border. Thank you very much.
That is the best part of it.
Thank you
That
very
is
much.
amazing. We're going to leave it at that. Ladies and gentlemen, my friend Michael Fertik, thank you for kicking this off
Thank you so much.
beautifully.
Thank you very much.
And I will see you all back here in just a few minutes.